sad to announce that there's been we're investigating a triple homicide here in the city of Columbia. Deceased at the home at 2854 Robert Drive is a female by the name of Sheri Coleman. She's 31 years old, and her two children, Garrett Coleman, who's 11 years old, and Gavin Coleman, who is 9 years old.
On the quiet morning of May 5th, 2009, in Columbia, Illinois, a husband and father left home for a routine trip to the gym. But when he returned, his world was shattered. His wife and two young sons were dead, and scary messages were written all over the walls of their house. Christopher Coleman, a former Marine and a devoted Christian, had just lost his family. At first, it seemed like a violent home invasion, random, senseless, and brutal. But as investigators combed through the crime scene, something felt off. There was no sign of forced entry, no valuables were taken, and the rage behind the killings felt deeply personal. What seemed like a random act of violence would expose a web of lies that destroyed everything. What happened to this seemingly perfect family? And what could drive someone to commit such a monstrous act against them? This is the horrifying story of the Coleman family murders, a case so tragic and disturbing that our entire team was shaken while working on this video. It's one of those stories that stays with you, and we believe it's something everyone should see. Welcome to Crime Aura, where the darkest true crime stories come to life. We bring you gripping stories every week, so make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to stay in the loop. Now, let's dive into today's story. What happens when faith, family, and fate collide? I want you to stay with me, and let's find out. Chris Coleman, born on March 20th, 1977, grew up in a religious and disciplined household in Chester, Illinois, a small community along the Mississippi River. Chris's father, Ron Coleman, served as a pastor at Grace Church Ministries, where he became a respected figure within the community. His sermons focused on themes of salvation, morality, and the power of faith in overcoming life's challenges. Known for his passionate preaching and unwavering dedication, Ron built a loyal congregation that looked to him for spiritual guidance. Chris's upbringing was deeply influenced by his parents, Ron and Connie Coleman, who instilled in their children the values of faith, morality, and hard work.
Love is the key if you're taking notes this morning. I've been married to this woman for 43 plus years now, and it keeps getting better.
Chris Coleman was the middle child in a devout Christian household. The Coleman family's lives revolved around the church, and Chris, along with his siblings, grew up attending weekly services, youth groups, and community events organized by their church. Chris attended Chester High School. While he did not excel academically, he was described by those who knew him as quiet, reserved, and well-mannered. His shy demeanor made him somewhat unremarkable among his peers, but he was generally liked and respected. Chris was not known to be rebellious or disruptive during his teenage years, and his life followed a predictable path shaped by his parents' expectations. From a young age, Chris showed an interest in law enforcement and the military. After graduating high school, Chris pursued this interest by enrolling in the United States Marine Corps. Chris Coleman's time in the Marine Corps marked a significant chapter in his early adulthood. The military exposed him to new experiences and challenges. Chris excelled in the Marines, where he was trained in communications and security. In 1997, Chris Coleman met 21-year-old Sheri Weiss, an MP in the U.S. Air Force. Sheri Weiss was a vivacious and caring woman whose early life set the foundation for the warm and loving personality she became known for. Born on December 5, 1977, in southern Illinois, Sheri grew up in the small town of Waterloo. From a young age, Sheri's outgoing personality set her apart. Chris and Sheri crossed paths while attending the Canine Training Center in San Antonio, and their connection quickly grew. For Sheri, joining the Air Force was simply a stepping stone, a way to explore the world and embrace life's journey. But when she met Chris, everything changed. She liked him right away and thought his quiet, shy nature was sweet. Their relationship blossomed quickly. though their personalities couldn't have been more different. Chris was reserved, cautious, and emotionally bottled up, rarely showing public affection, a trait deeply rooted in his upbringing and the church's teachings about relationships. In contrast, Sheri was open, expressive, and unafraid to wear her emotions on her sleeve. She brought a lively energy to Chris's otherwise measured demeanor, pushing his boundaries in ways that seemed to excite him. Just 3 months into their relationship, Sheri became pregnant. For her, this was a pivotal moment. She knew that to provide a stable, loving home for her child, she needed to commit to a more grounded lifestyle. This meant leaving the Air Force and focusing on building a family with Chris. On August 8, 1997, Chris and Sheri got married. Sheri embraced her role as a wife with enthusiasm and dedication. The couple settled in Columbia, Illinois, where they began building a life together. Sheri's greatest joy came when she became a mother. The couple welcomed their first son, Garrett, followed by their second son, Gavin. Sheri was deeply committed to her faith, actively volunteering at her local church in St. Louis, where she and Chris worshiped. She organized fundraisers for the needy and was generous to a fault. After the birth of their first son, Garrett, Chris left the Marines, claiming he wanted a higher-paying job to support his family. Chris soon began working as a bodyguard for Joyce Meyer, the well-known televangelist, and his life would take a dark turn that no one could have predicted. Joyce Meyer is one of the most recognizable faces in Christian broadcasting, a televangelist with a global following and a message that has resonated with millions. But for the Coleman family, she wasn't just a public figure. She was a trusted friend, a spiritual ally, someone they'd known for years through church circles and shared ministry work. Chris Coleman's parents, Connie and Ron, had built a long-standing relationship with Joyce. So when Chris left the Marine Corps and found himself in need of stable work to support his wife Sheri and their 2 sons, it was only natural that the family turned to Joyce for help. And she didn't hesitate. Joyce offered Chris a position on her personal security team, a job that wasn't just high-paying, but also prestigious. Working closely with one of the most powerful and influential women in Christian media came with status, benefits, and a certain level of trust. For Chris, the transition from military life to a high-profile ministry job seemed like a blessing. It was a fresh start, a golden opportunity. At the time, Joyce Meyer was at the peak of her influence. Her passionate sermons, filled with bold truths and practical advice, were broadcast around the world. She wasn't just a preacher, she was a brand.
Shake it off and step up on top of it. Come on, let's practice. Get up, you're gonna do it with me. I ain't doing this by myself. Come on, how are you gonna get free? Woo!
Her message of transformation, faith, and personal responsibility struck a chord with viewers across cultural and denominational lines. In 1993, her television show Enjoying Everyday Life hit major networks like BET, giving her access to millions of homes and catapulting her into the mainstream. The program became a cornerstone of her empire, broadening her reach far beyond traditional church walls. By 2002, Joyce's brand had become a publishing powerhouse. The Hachette Book Group, one of the largest publishers in the world, paid a staggering $10 million for the rights to her entire back catalog of inspirational books. That deal not only solidified her position as one of the leading voices in televangelism, it also made her a multi-millionaire. But with fame and fortune came scrutiny. As her ministry ballooned in size and budget, so did the criticism. Supporters praised her for her boldness and clarity. Detractors, however, began to question whether her lavish lifestyle was in line with the gospel she preached. The private jet, the luxurious homes, the expensive wardrobe. For some, it was hard to reconcile the image of a humble servant of God with the life of high-end comfort and financial abundance. Things came to a head in 2003 when the St. Louis Post-Dispatch published an in-depth 4-part investigation into Joyce Meyer Ministries. The exposé painted a controversial picture of how the ministry handled its donations, highlighting extravagant spending, blurred financial boundaries, and a growing concern about whether the line between spiritual service and personal enrichment had been crossed. Among the most eye-opening revelations were details about her personal spending, a $10 million corporate jet, her husband's $107,000 silver gray Mercedes sedan, a $2 million home, alongside additional houses for her 4 children worth another $2 million combined, a sprawling $20 million headquarters outfitted with $5.7 million worth of luxury furnishings. The breakdown of these furnishings painted an even more detailed picture of excess. Inside the ministry's headquarters, there was a $30,000 round conference table, a $23,000 marble-topped antique commode, a chest of drawers, a $14,000 custom office bookcase, a $7,000 Dresden porcelain depiction of the Stations of the Cross, a $63,300 eagle sculpture on a pedestal, another silver eagle sculpture worth $5,000. Numerous paintings, each costing between $1,000 and $4,000. To her critics, Joyce Meyer's extravagant spending wasn't just a footnote, it was the smoking gun. They saw it as undeniable proof of hypocrisy, a preacher who spoke about humility and sacrifice while living in million-dollar homes and traveling by private jet. Many pointed to scripture that warned against the dangers of wealth and materialism, arguing that her words and her actions betrayed the values she claimed to uphold. This growing tension followed Joyce wherever she went. The country seemed split in two, those who viewed her as a spiritual trailblazer changing lives through faith, and those who saw her as a cunning opportunist exploiting religion for profit. The divide wasn't just ideological, it was personal. As her visibility increased, so did the backlash. Angry letters, accusatory emails, threatening phone calls. Joyce Meyer became a frequent target of vitriol. Some labeled her a fraud. Others went further, calling her a thief, a charlatan, even a danger to Christianity itself. And some of those threats turned dark, disturbingly dark. Because of the constant danger, Joyce Meyer Ministries operated under tight security protocols. Every sermon, every conference, every meet and greet required close protection. It wasn't just about guarding a public figure, it was about protecting someone who had become a lightning rod for both admiration and hatred. This is where Chris Coleman came in. As a member of Joyce's personal security team, Chris held one of the most trusted and high-paying positions within the ministry. These were not your average church security jobs. Bodyguards for Joyce Meyer could earn upwards of $100,000 a year, with benefits and travel perks. It was a role that combined privilege, purpose, and a sense of power. For Chris, it meant a steady paycheck and a life of comfort. But it also meant being on the road constantly, traveling across the country with Joyce Meyer's tour schedule. He was part of the inner circle, entrusted with safeguarding the face of one of the most powerful ministries in the world. Let's go back now to Columbia, Illinois, a quiet and peaceful suburb where Chris Coleman lived with his family. It's a beautiful town, just a short drive across the Mississippi River from the busy and sometimes dangerous city of St. Louis, Missouri. Unlike St. Louis, Columbia is known for being safe. In fact, the crime rate is lower than in 69% of U.S. cities. On average, there's only about one violent crime for every 1,000 people. For families like the Colemans, that kind of safety was comforting. It made them feel like they were far away from the problems of the big city. Chris, his wife Sheri, and their 2 sons, Garrett and Gavin, seemed to have a simple, stable life. But even with Chris often away, their home life in Columbia looked peaceful from the outside. They lived close to Chris's parents, Ron and Connie Coleman, who often helped watch the boys. Their neighborhood was friendly. People greeted each other from their driveways, kids played outside without worry, and families decorated their homes for every holiday. But sometimes, even the safest places can't keep danger away. For the Colemans, everything started to change in late 2008. That's when the threats began. In November of that year, Chris got a very disturbing email. It wasn't just sent to him. It also went to Joyce Meyer and her son. The email came from a strange Gmail address, destroychris@gmail.com. The subject line was terrifying. Chris's family, they are dead. The email was full of harsh words and violent threats. The person who wrote it warned that Chris's job with Joyce Meyer was putting his family in danger. Joyce doesn't quit preaching. Then they will die during the Houston conference, the email said. I will kill them all as they sleep if I don't hit there. Then I will kill them during the book tour or the trip to India. I know where he lives, and I know they are alone. The message wasn't just scary, it was personal. The sender seemed to know Joyce Meyer's travel plans, and also knew when Chris would be away from home, leaving Sheri and the boys alone. Whoever it was had done their homework. Sadly, that email wasn't the end of it. More threats came. In early January 2009, Chris found a letter in the family's mailbox. It had no name or return address, just more of the same hateful language and scary threats. The note attacked Chris's faith and his job working for Joyce Meyer. "Deny your God publicly, or else no more opportunities," the letter said. "Time is running out for you and your family." By April, things got even worse. Another note arrived, starting with a chilling sentence: "I am giving you the last warning." This time, the writer accused Chris of being fake and greedy. "I have warned you to stop traveling and to stop carrying on with this fake religious life of stealing people's money. You think you are so special to do what you do protecting, or think you are protecting her? This is my last warning. Your worst nightmare is about to happen." After months of fear and no answers, Chris finally went to the police. But even with their help, there wasn't much progress. The letters and emails had been written carefully to hide the sender's identity. Thankfully, one person took a special interest in helping the family: Detective Sergeant Justin Barlow. He lived just a few houses away from the Colemans and worked with the Columbia Police Department. He promised to keep an eye on their home and do whatever he could to help. As a first step, Barlow set up a security camera pointed at the Colemans' mailbox. The goal was simple: to catch whoever was leaving the threatening letters. For a little while, it seemed like things were calming down. No more letters came, no more emails. But as spring turned to summer, the situation took a devastating turn, one that no security camera could prevent. On the fateful morning of May 5th, 2009, the day began like any other Tuesday. The spring air was mild as Chris prepared for his usual morning routine. He left home early, heading to his gym in South St. Louis County. While driving, Chris called his wife Sheri twice and left a voicemail when she didn't answer. He also sent her a text message but got no response. As Chris crossed the Jefferson Barracks Bridge on his way back into Columbia, worry began to creep in. Sheri was usually awake by now, and she always picked up his calls. By the time it was 5:45 a.m., Chris was concerned enough to call Detective Barlow, his neighbor and the officer aware of the threats his family had been receiving. He asked Barlow to check on his wife and kids. Barlow didn't hesitate. Knowing the danger the Colemans had been under, he immediately called it into the Columbia Police Department. He met another officer outside the Coleman house minutes later. The officers approached the front door, ringing the bell several times. There was no answer. They knocked again, still nothing. As they circled the house, they spotted an open window at the back, its screen removed and leaning against a table and some patio chairs. Fearing the worst, the two officers climbed through the window into the house. As soon as they walked in, a strong chemical smell hit them. The air was thick with the sharp scent of spray paint. It was clear something was very wrong. The officers went upstairs from the basement and saw something shocking: red spray paint all over the walls. Angry words and scary messages were written everywhere, like "You have paid, punished, and I am always watching." The scene was already scary, but the worst part was still ahead. As the officers were examining the graffiti, they heard the sound of a door opening from the basement. It was Chris, returning home from the gym. The officers quickly intercepted him, instructing him to stay outside as they continued their search. What they found upstairs confirmed their worst fears. Chris's family, his wife Sheri and their two sons, Garrett and Gavin, had been brutally murdered in their beds. Sheri was found naked, lying face down on her bed. 11-year-old Garrett and 9-year-old Gavin were in their rooms, lifeless and surrounded by the same blood-red spray paint that covered the walls. Horrifyingly, some of the graffiti was scrawled on their bodies. All three had been strangled to death. Evidence suggested that Sheri had been the first victim. Her hairs were found on Gavin's body, indicating he was killed shortly after his mother. Outside, the officers broke the devastating news to Chris. By now, it was just after 7:05 a.m. The day had barely begun, and Chris Coleman's family was gone. The once quiet suburban street of Columbia, Illinois, was now the site of a shocking triple homicide. But the question remained, what had happened to the Coleman family? Garrett, Gavin, and Sheri Coleman had all been killed by ligature strangulation. Murder is always an aberration, but this particular crime scene felt especially surreal, almost like something out of a movie. At first glance, it appeared that the alleged stalker who had been threatening Chris and Joyce had finally acted on their threats, breaking into the Coleman home to kill Sheri and the boys. However, upon closer inspection, the scene raised numerous red flags. When the police arrived, there was no sign of forced entry. There was an unlocked window with the screen removed, but the screen was found intact and placed carefully, suggesting it had been purposely removed rather than forcefully ripped out. Additionally, the police noticed multiple points of entry left open, which struck them as odd given Chris's profession as a security guard. If Chris was genuinely afraid of a stalker, why would he leave his home so vulnerable? Moreover, the method of killing was perplexing. The killer chose strangulation, one of the most intimate and personal ways to murder someone. Strangulation requires time and significant physical effort, typically associated with crimes of passion, where the perpetrator harbors deep, personal rage towards the victim. Given that the supposed stalker had no personal ties to Sheri and the boys and was primarily angry with Joyce and Chris, a quicker method like using a knife or gun would have made more sense. The timeline also didn't add up. The killer had a very limited window to carry out the murders and write the menacing messages on the walls. Each strangulation would have taken at least 5 minutes, with Sheri's taking significantly longer due to the apparent beating she endured. Chris left the house at 5 a.m. according to the security cameras, and Detective Barlow arrived at 6 a.m. Security footage confirmed that no one else had entered the home after Chris left. All these inconsistencies pointed to one conclusion. The story of a vengeful stalker was a fabrication. There was never a masked intruder targeting Joyce by killing her bodyguard's family. The amount of time, effort, and malice required to carry out these murders was significant, and it all pointed squarely at Chris Coleman. The police in the Major Crimes Unit immediately recognized that the timeline Chris provided didn't make sense. According to Chris, he and Sheri had spent a normal evening together, and when he left the house at 5 a.m., she was still alive, somewhat awake, and everything seemed fine. But the state of decomposition, combined with the temperature of the bodies, told a different story. Sheri and the boys had been dead for hours before the police arrived. By 5 a.m., when Chris claimed he kissed his wife goodbye, Sheri's body would have been cold and unresponsive. It was inconceivable that he wouldn't have noticed. Later on May 5, 2009, Chris was invited for interrogation at the Columbia Police Department. At this point, Chris Coleman wasn't under arrest. He was just a suspect. The police needed to ask him questions to try to understand what had happened and if he knew anything that could help. This was the start of Chris Coleman's police interrogation, just hours after his family was found murdered.
And you know what, for right now, I'm just going to have a seat there. I'm not sure what to do, but... Here's another water if you need it, okay?
By the time Chris was brought in for questioning, the police had already discovered inconsistencies in Chris's account of the events. His statements didn't match the evidence they had gathered. This led them to suspect that Chris wasn't just a grieving husband and father. He was their prime suspect. The investigators approached Chris with a calm and understanding tone, trying to ease him into the conversation. They weren't accusing him outright, but rather seeking his side of the story. They asked him to walk them through the morning of May 5th, 2009. Chris began describing the events.
I'll tell you what, from the beginning, let's just start out from when you got up this morning until the time you pulled up at the house. Just kind of walk me through that first, and then we'll go through and kind of explain, talk about some different things as far as the emails you've been getting.
I set my alarm clock for 5:30, and I used my phone for my alarm clock. And got up at 5:30, went in the bathroom. These clothes here I got on, and went to the bathroom and basically got in the truck and left. and drove off. I got to, I don't know where I was at, but called Sheri to wake her up, get her going, and she didn't answer, of course. And, and so I went on to the gym, to Gold's Gym, and over by Ronnie's Plaza in South County, and started working out. I text her at some point. I might even called her again. I don't remember. I could probably look at my phone if you want me to.
Do you guys have a home phone number too, or just cell phones?
We just used. I text her, and then she still didn't respond. And probably now, well, after 6 o'clock, sometime when I texted her or called her, I'm sure it's still on her phone. What time it was. Okay. And she didn't respond. It's not like her because the kids should have been up and stuff, or getting up and going by then. Called her again on the way back, or when I was getting ready to leave, and she didn't respond again. And I started getting a little concerned because it's not like her not to answer the phone. Sometimes she won't answer if she's in the shower, but she always calls me back right away. And so she didn't do that at all. And that's when I called you.
What time did you text her back? The second time?
I can tell you.
6:23. So at 6:23 a.m. is when you first texted her this morning. It says, "Hey, baby, are you awake?"
Did you try to call before that? I'm sorry.
I can pull up the call log too if you want me to.
Okay, that just does text. I'm sorry. All right, so you're just looking at the text, and how are those out, Justin?
So the first one is from you. It says, "Hey, baby, you awake?"
6:23. I'm sorry.
6:23 a.m. And then and she doesn't respond to you, correct?
It would be on there.
Oh, yeah, right. So the second one from you says, "I know you was tired last night." 6:23 says, "I have about 5 minutes left on cardio, then I'll be home." She never responded to any of them because I could tell her. 7:27 says, "Hello, you up?"
7:27?
I'm sorry, 6:27. 6:27. And then at the same time, at 6:27, another one goes out and says, "Time to get the kids up."
As the interrogation continued, the detectives shifted the focus to something that had been troubling them: the threatening emails Chris had reported receiving in the weeks leading up to the murders. They asked him about them, hoping to get more details. Chris explained that he had received several ominous messages, which he believed were sent by someone trying to intimidate him and his family.
Back in November last year, you were getting some of those emails sent to your work email address, right? Do you still have those on your computer?
I could look.
Okay.
They might be on the server. Even.
Okay.
I doubt if they're on the computer because it deletes them after so long.
Kind of purges them out, type of thing.
But I would think they'd be on the server.
And how many threats like that? I mean, up until November, have you ever gotten threats like that before?
No, people have been upset with me, but I haven't gotten anything. I mean, I've had people yell at me and cuss at me and everything else, but, and escort them off the property and all that stuff,
As Chris spoke, his emotions started to show. He began sobbing, clearly overwhelmed by the weight of the situation. The detective, noticing his distress, tried to pacify him, offering words of reassurance. They told him they understood how difficult this must be and assured him they were committed to seeing the case through to the end. But they made it clear, if he wanted to help them find the truth, he needed to cooperate fully.
Chris, we're gonna get past that, okay? We're gonna work this out and get through it, all right? But what we need, the best thing you can do for us is help us. Try to fill it. You're doing a great job, man. But the best thing we can do is work together and try to figure all this out, okay? All right.
As the detectives continued to piece together the timeline, they asked Chris a simple but important question. Did you notice anything unusual when you left that morning? It seemed like a small detail, but in investigations like this, small details matter.
Anything as far as that sticks out in your mind from this morning when you left? Did you notice anything?
The only thing I told somebody was, the only thing I can remember is having to slow down for a car backing out of the driveway. That's it.
From which driveway were they backing out of?
I don't know. He asked me the same thing. It was like 3 or 4 out. I don't know. On the left-hand side. That's the only thing I remember.
You notice anything about the car?
It was just a darker color. Is the only thing. I'm sorry. I should have been more observant.
Anything that sticks out? I mean, were you able to tell him like what kind of car it was? Did you recognize it in the neighborhood at all? Or?
No, just backing out of the driveway. I didn't even see it come out of the garage or anything.
As the questions continued, detectives brought up something oddly specific. They asked Chris if he had any paint at his house. That might seem like a random question, but to the detectives, it wasn't random at all. They had found threatening messages spray-painted inside the Coleman home. Now, they were trying to find out, could that paint have come from Chris's own supply?
Do you have any paint at your house?
I think so.
No, don't.
I don't think so.
Any spray paint?
No. If I do, it's old.
As the conversation went on, Chris began to open up about his personal life. He talked about problems in his marriage, how things hadn't been the same for a while. He admitted that months before the murders, he and Sheri had even gone to marriage counseling. He said they were trying to work things out, but the tension was still there. Then came the mention of divorce. Chris claimed they had discussed it, but nothing was decided.
We kind of talked about the divorce a little bit.
This last December?
Yeah.
Really?
And I went to Joyce with it, told her about it, or Danny, I can't remember which one. And they knew about it, and they suggested that we meet with somebody and see if we could work out whatever it was. And really all it was just communication, not communicating very well. And so,
Did you meet with somebody?
yeah, Mike Shepard, the guy that's here downstairs in the lobby,
Okay.
he's and we've been meeting with him pretty regularly, and things have been going pretty awesome.
How often do you meet with them? You said regularly.
He travels overseas a lot too, and so as often as me and him schedule, I'd say on average maybe once a week.
Oh.
Then came one of the most critical questions of the entire interrogation. The detectives looked Chris in the eye and asked, "Was your wife alive when you left the house that morning?" Chris didn't hesitate. He said yes. He claimed Sheri was in bed, alive and asleep when he left for the gym. But the detectives had already been to the scene. They knew what time the murders happened, and based on the timeline, Sheri was already dead before Chris even walked out the door. That's when the tone in the room shifted. They confronted him. They told Chris the truth he hadn't admitted. "Your wife was not alive when you left. We know that, and it's time for you to start telling the truth." Then came the big question, direct and heavy. "Were you involved in the deaths of your family?" Chris looked them in the eye and denied it.
When you left the house this morning, was your wife alive?
Oh yeah.
What would you say if I told you that I don't think she was?
I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. I think she was. I mean, she was.
Okay.
She was laying right beside me.
Right. And I'm not doubting that. I'm not doubting that you were there, and I'm not doubting that you care. But I am doubting that she was alive when you left this morning. Physically, what we have are different ways to tell how long a person's been deceased. That was done. And what do you think that showed?
I don't know. I guess the time frame when I was gone.
No, you guys wrong. Chris, we need to get this resolved. That you can't argue with physical evidence.
Right. I'm not trying to argue with it.
All
I
right.
don't.
What I'm telling you is there is no other explanation. There's no other reason that the information we have would support what you're telling us. That it can't. You've told us a story and we've gone over it numerous times.
Right.
You know what? We walk out to Justin, maybe we missed this. Let's go in and talk to him about this and just make sure that we're not missing something. Let's give him every opportunity to tell us exactly what happened and maybe we're missing something. That's why we go out and we come back in and we go out and we come back in. I did have to use the restroom, that was legitimate, but we go out and we come back in. And we felt very comfortable that we were giving you every opportunity to tell us something that was going to contradict the information that we had. All right, we've got this information, you're saying it, and we're giving you opportunity to give us something contrary to what you told us before. Oh, yeah, all right, that would make sense. That hasn't happened.
Just tell me
That
what
hasn't
happened.
happened. Listen, man, she wasn't alive when you left.
She was alive, but just laying right beside
Listen
me.
to me. We can go back and forth with this all day long, but the physical evidence doesn't lie, man. She was not alive when you left this morning. The children weren't alive when we left this morning.
Yes, they were.
No, come on, Chris.
They
We gotta get over this. Now there's reasons, and that's the point we're at. I wanna hear the reasons. Now's when we need to find out what happened, man. It's so important. You're at a great point to be able to help us to try to figure this out. We already know what happened. We need to know why it happened.
I don't
All
know
right,
what to
listen.
tell you.
Listen, no, you do know what to tell us.
No, I don't.
Come on, Chris. She was not alive when you left. The children were not alive when you left. That's true, and I know that's true.
No, it just...
We need to clear this up now. We need to clear it up now. Did something happen? What happened?
Nothing happened.
What was going on in your life, Chris? Because I can't buy what you're saying. The physical evidence does not lie, Chris. It does not. She was not alive when you left, period. The physical evidence does not lie, man.
What do you want me to tell you?
The truth.
I'm telling you the truth.
How did we get to this point? That's what I need to know. I need to know how and why we got to the point we're at right now. We both know you're not telling me the truth. We both know that. I've done this a long time. I'm looking into your eyes, and I can tell you you're not being truthful, Chris. We need an answer. And there are answers. As bad as this sounds, as bad as this looks, or you may think it looks, we understand, and I've talked to many people who have given me reasons, and it's like, you know what? All right, I can understand how somebody might have been feeling that at that time. And maybe they acted on it and they shouldn't have, and they regret it. There's no way to turn clocks back. You can't turn clocks back. You understand that, don't you?
Right.
You can't turn the clock back. The only thing we can do is go forward from this point, and we need to know what and why it happened. Come on, Chris, help me out with this.
I'm telling you, I've already told you. I've told everybody. I told the guy in the ambulance. I told you. I told him.
The more we go back like this, the more it makes me think that there maybe even isn't a good explanation for it. We need to know what happened. We can't keep going on this. It didn't, she was alive when I left. We know that's not true, and there's nothing we can do about changing that. If we know she wasn't alive when you left this morning, there's got to be an explanation. Now is the time to tell us. Now is the time to get this out in the open.
I don't know what else to tell you.
Yes, you do. Yes,
No.
you do. You have to tell me the truth, Chris.
I'm telling you the truth.
Were you involved in her death?
No,
Was someone you know involved in her death?
I don't know.
Did you know? Did you talk to anybody about arranging her death?
No, absolutely not.
As the hours dragged on, Chris Coleman stuck to his story, denying any involvement in the murder of his wife and sons. What he didn't know was that the investigators were already steps ahead, and they were about to confront him with something much harder to explain. Before the investigation goes any deeper, we need to take a step back. Back to 1997, just before Chris married Sheri. At that time, their relationship looked like something out of a fairy tale. They were young, in love, and full of hope for the future. The first signs of trouble appeared when Sheri met Chris's parents, Connie and Ron Coleman. To everyone else, they seemed like the ideal couple, strong in their Christian faith, always preaching love and kindness. But when it came to Sheri, their actions spoke louder than words. They didn't like her. Not at all. Sheri could feel it, even though they never said it outright.
When he came back with Sheri, what did you think?
Surprise. I was surprised. I wasn't impressed one way or the other. She was just a little blonde-headed girl to me.
They didn't make it obvious, but over time, the disapproval became clearer. They would often talk down about Sheri in front of Chris, making it clear that they didn't approve of her. It created tension. Chris was caught between the woman he loved and the parents he had always obeyed. As time went on, the pressure started to build on Chris. Not only did he have to deal with his parents' disapproval, but he was also facing challenges in his marriage. The situation became even more difficult when Chris's job began to weigh on him. After their second child was born, Chris started to question his job working security for Joyce Meyer. Some days, Chris would talk excitedly about his job. He would share how exciting the travel was, how he got to visit fancy places, and how honored he was to protect a well-known leader. It sounded glamorous, but other days, he would talk about the job in a very different way. The way Chris talked about his job showed his inner struggle. He wasn't fulfilled by the life he was living. Back home, Sheri had her own concerns. She missed her husband and wanted him to be more present in their children's lives. She asked him to consider finding a job that didn't involve so much travel, one that would allow him to be around more often. But Chris shut her down. He told her his job was important, that it was how he provided for their family, and he didn't want to talk about quitting. What started as a simple disagreement quickly escalated into a repeated argument. Chris grew tired of Sheri's requests. The cracks in their marriage were becoming more and more obvious, so much so that even Joyce Meyer had to intervene. She could no longer ignore the tension between Chris and Sheri. Seeing the strain, she took it upon herself to step in and offered her recommendations to help the couple. Joyce suggested they attend marriage counseling with a trusted pastor, someone who could guide them through their issues and help them rebuild what was breaking.
I did know that he and Sheri were having some marital problems. What he told me is that he felt that Sheri was very controlling, that no matter what he did, she wasn't happy, and that they just in general, were not getting along, and that he was just really tired of it. And at that point, I asked him if, they'd be willing to get some marriage counseling from a pastor that we have at our office, and right away he said yes, they were willing to do that, which they did do.
At first, things seemed to improve. The pastor thought Chris was making an effort. The couple talked through some of their old issues, and for a brief moment, it seemed like they were making progress. On November 8th, 2008, something happened that would change everything. During a Joyce Meyer conference in Florida, Chris Coleman met Tara Lintz. What's painfully ironic? It was actually Sheri, his wife, who had introduced Tara to the ministry in the first place. Sheri and Tara went way back. In high school, they were like sisters. They shared everything: jokes, secrets, dreams. But while Sheri eventually chose a quieter life, marrying Chris and starting a family, Tara took a different road. She stayed single, lived freely, and worked nightlife jobs, as a hostess at a gentleman's club and a cocktail waitress. Her life looked nothing like Sheri's. At the conference, Chris and Tara hit it off almost instantly. They bonded over shared stories and common interests. And while Sheri was back home holding on to the hope that she could fix her marriage, Chris was already emotionally checked out. He didn't just move on. He moved on with Tara, the very friend Sheri had once loved like a sister. Sheri had invited Tara to the Joyce Meyer conference with good intentions. She genuinely believed Tara needed some spiritual guidance. She hoped Tara would find God and maybe settle down. But instead of helping her friend, she unknowingly opened the door to her own betrayal. What started as harmless conversations between Chris and Tara quickly turned into a full-blown affair. And this betrayal wasn't just a typical affair, it was personal. Deeply personal. And Chris, he became completely consumed. This wasn't just a fling for him, it became an obsession. He kept a note on his phone and computer simply titled Tara. In it, he recorded every little thing about her: her birthday, height, eye color, shoe size, ring size, favorite flowers, favorite perfumes, the things she liked and didn't like. He even noted the exact date they first slept together. He wasn't just having an affair, he was planning a future. In that same list, he wrote down Christmas gift ideas for her, including a promise ring with either a round diamond or a diamond cross. In Chris's mind, Tara was his future, not Sheri, not the family he already had. He believed Tara was his destiny, and he was willing to sacrifice everything to be with her. Chris's obsession with Tara didn't stay hidden in private texts or secret notes. It grew stronger by the day, and soon it spilled over into his work life. As part of his duties with Joyce Meyer Ministries, Chris often traveled across the country for conferences and speaking events. But instead of focusing on security and professionalism, Chris started using these trips as personal getaways with Tara. He found ways to bring her along, turning work assignments into mini vacations for their affair to flourish. Chris has been caught up in a fantasy that felt more exciting than anything he had back home. One trip in particular made everything shockingly clear. During a ministry trip to Hawaii, Chris crossed a line that showed just how deep his obsession ran. In a hotel room that should have been his safe zone for work, he filmed an explicit video of Tara. In the video, Chris speaks softly and casually, clearly comfortable in his wrongdoing. "Where are we?" "We're in Hawaii," he says, half laughing. Then, without a hint of shame, he adds, "being bad." The camera follows Tara, naked, confident, and carefree, as she walks around the room, completely at ease with the situation.
Where are we?
We're in Hawaii.
Sweet daddy.
Being bad.
Bad?
Kinda bad. This is Tara, my own home video of naked Tara.
Their secret relationship wasn't just about stolen kisses or late-night phone calls. It had turned into something bigger, something more dangerous. In just a few months, they had already visited Arizona and Hawaii together, and they were now planning a romantic cruise for New Year's Eve. Still, Chris kept feeding the flame. He and Tara documented nearly every moment together. They took photos and videos, some intimate, some explicit. They looked like a couple deeply in love, not like two people sneaking behind someone else's back. In one particularly disturbing clip, Chris recorded himself showering and pleasuring himself, whispering love messages to Tara.
So, anyway, just wanted to say I love you, and as you can hear, what's funny is you are messaging me now. Said, show me your picture, say I love my hair today. Look at you, you look so hot.
He claimed she made him feel alive, like she had unlocked a version of him that had been hidden for years. These videos weren't locked away in some private folder either. At least one of them, an explicit video of Tara, ended up on Chris' father's computer. Yes, his father's computer. That detail adds a disturbing twist to an already toxic situation. What his father knew or didn't know is unclear, but the fact that Chris transferred such content to a family device shows just how careless and consumed he had become. This wasn't just an affair anymore. It was an obsession that had taken over Chris's judgment, his priorities, and his entire life. And while Chris lived in a fantasy world with Tara back home, Sheri's world was slowly being torn apart. For months, Sheri had been trying to reignite the spark between herself and Chris, but her efforts were always met with rejection. Chris simply didn't want to engage with her on any level, and while Sheri was doing everything she could to keep their marriage alive, Chris was tearing it apart, piece by piece. Sheri's friend, Anne, began to notice that something was off when the couple started attending counseling. Sheri saw therapy as her last chance to save their marriage, but Chris treated it like a performance. According to Sheri's text messages to friends and family, Chris put on a convincing show during their counseling sessions. He acted remorseful, saying all the right things to make it seem like he wanted to work on their relationship. But the moment they left the sessions, his behavior flipped. Chris's disregard for Sheri extended to their children, Gavin and Garrett. The family had been looking forward to a Disney World vacation for months, a reward for the boys that they were thrilled about. But Chris made a decision that devastated them all. Without informing Sheri or the boys, he canceled the vacation entirely. Instead, he used the money they had saved for the trip to book a romantic cruise to the Virgin Islands for himself and Tara. In Chris's mind, his family was no longer a source of love or comfort. Instead, they had become a heavy weight on his shoulders, one that drained him emotionally, mentally, and financially. What once brought him pride and joy had turned into something he resented. He often complained about how his money never seemed to be his own. He worked long hours, yet he felt like he had no control over his time, his freedom, or even his bank account. Chris began to think about how different his life could be, how better it might be, if he didn't have a wife or children holding him back. Quietly, those thoughts grew stronger. But even with all that resentment building inside him, divorce wasn't something Chris was willing to consider. Why? Joyce Meyer. Joyce wasn't just his boss, she was a powerful figure in his life. Her teachings weren't just heard from a stage or TV screen. Chris lived by them, or at least appeared to. And one of Joyce Meyer's strongest messages was about marriage. She believed marriage was sacred. Divorce, in her view, wasn't just a failure. It was a sin, something to be avoided at all costs unless there was abuse or infidelity. So Chris stayed, but not because he wanted to fix the marriage. He stayed because leaving through divorce wasn't an option that fit the image he had built around himself, especially the one his church and employer expected him to uphold. He didn't want to be married. He didn't want the family he had helped build. And with each passing day, the gap between the life he had and the life he wanted kept growing wider. Though Sheri had long suspected that Chris was having an affair with Tara, and had even shown someone a photo of the woman she believed was tearing her marriage apart, she still clung to a fragile hope that Chris would come to his senses and fight for their family. That somehow, the man she married would return, but that hope would not last long. On November 14, 2008, Joyce Meyer, Chris Coleman, and Joyce's son received a message from the email account destroychris@gmail.com. The subject line read, "Chris's family, they are dead." The message was as follows: "I'm sure this will make it to someone in the company. If you jackasses are like any other company, this will be someone's account. Pass this on to Chris. Tell Joyce to stop preaching the bullshit, or Chris's family will die. If I can't get to Joyce, then I will get to someone close to her. And if I can't get him, I will kill his wife and kids. I know Joyce's schedule, so I know Chris's schedule. If Joyce doesn't quit preaching the bullshit, then they will die during the Houston conference. I will kill them all as they sleep. If I don't hit there, then I will kill them during the book tour or the trip to India. I know where he lives, and I know they are alone. F them all, and they will die soon. Tell that mother next time, let me talk to Joyce. She needs to hear what I have to say, and now she will." On the surface, the email looked like a terrifying threat. It warned of danger, not just for Chris Coleman's family, but also for his boss, Joyce Meyer. But when you take a closer look, things didn't quite add up. The message was full of strange inconsistencies and suspicious details that raised red flags. For starters, the email was supposedly written by someone who wanted Joyce Meyer to stop preaching. But instead of threatening her directly, the sender warned that Chris's wife and kids would be killed if she didn't step away from the ministry. That alone didn't make much sense. Why threaten the family of her security guard instead of targeting Joyce herself? It felt like a roundabout, illogical way to send a message. The way the email was written raised questions. The sender seemed to believe the email was going directly to Joyce, but kept instructing her to pass the warning along to Chris. That was strange. If the person truly hated Joyce, why would they count on her to deliver such an important threat to someone else? Why not just contact Chris directly? Or better yet, threaten Joyce personally? Then there was the tone of the message. It didn't read like something written in a fit of rage. Instead, it felt oddly rehearsed, almost like someone trying to sound angry, rather than actually being angry. The sentences were neat, the threats calculated, and the language didn't quite fit what real stalkers or obsessed fans typically write. It felt like someone trying to pretend to be dangerous. Toward the end of the email, the sender mentioned something interesting: that Chris had once stopped them from talking to Joyce at an event. They hinted that they had been thrown out or ignored by him. If that were true, it would mean the sender had been close enough to get on Joyce's radar, close enough for security to remember. But when detectives asked Chris about this supposed incident, he said he didn't remember anything like that ever happening. No one had been thrown out, no angry fan, no stalker, nothing unusual. On top of that, event footage and security records didn't show any problems or disturbances during the times the email referred to. And then more emails started arriving, all from the same account, destroychris@gmail.com. The messages became darker, angrier, and more graphic. The sender talked about blood, about death, about not stopping until Chris's family was gone. To an outsider, it looked like a serious case of stalking, maybe even the early warning signs of something much worse. But the deeper you look, the more questions one you will ask. Why were the threats so focused on Chris's family and not Joyce Meyer? Why was there no evidence of this person showing up in real life? And why didn't anything in the emails match up with real behavior from people who actually carry out threats like this? It was all starting to feel staged. The emails made it seem like a crazy person was full of hate for Joyce Meyer and her ministry. But instead of focusing on Joyce, most of the threats were aimed at Chris and his family. The way the emails were written was aggressive and messy, with lots of grammar mistakes. But what really made investigators suspicious was the timing and details. The threats always came at strange times, just before important moments in Chris's life. The messages got worse over time. They became more violent, with direct threats to hurt Chris's wife and kids. At the same time, the sender kept going on and on about Joyce Meyer, even though the real danger seemed focused on the Coleman family. One email in particular clearly said something bad would soon happen to Sheri and the children. "I am giving you the last warning. You have not listened to me, and you have not changed your ways. I have warned you to stop traveling and to stop carrying on with this fake religious life of stealing people's money. You think you are so special to do what you do protecting, or think you are protecting her? She is a and not worth you doing it. Stop today or else. I know your schedule. You can't hide from me ever. I'm always watching. I know when you leave in the morning and I know when you stay home. I saw you leave this morning. I will be watching. You better stop traveling and doing what you are doing. This is my last warning. Your worst nightmare is about to happen. 6 months after the first threatening email, Sheri Coleman and her 2 young sons were dead. Chris Coleman remained at the Columbia Police Department, seated across from detectives who were meticulously gathering every piece of evidence they could. Their mission was clear: uncover the truth, no matter how ugly it was. During the interrogation, the detectives shifted the conversation toward Chris's personal life. They asked about his sex life with Sheri and whether he'd been unfaithful. Chris at first denied everything. No affairs, no problems, nothing to confess. But as the questions became more direct, he faltered. Eventually, he admitted something unexpected. He said he had been spending a lot of time talking with Tara Lintz, one of Sheri's childhood friends. According to him, Sheri knew about the friendship and wasn't concerned. He explained that Tara had come to a conference in Tampa and he'd simply helped her settle in. After that, they kept in touch. When the detectives asked if anything inappropriate had happened between them, Chris paused just for a moment before claiming they had only exchanged a few inappropriate text messages. That was it. No physical relationship, nothing serious. Just some words. But now they had a name, Tara Lintz, and that was enough to take the next step. Investigators reached out to the St. Petersburg Police Department with an urgent request: send a homicide detective to Tara's house. They needed to know everything she knew. About Chris, about the Coleman family, and especially about Sheri, given that she and Tara had been close friends since childhood. Not long after, the response came back. Tara had spoken to detectives. She didn't hesitate, no sugarcoating. She told them, in clear and certain terms, she and Chris Coleman were having a full-blown affair, and they were in love.
It's Tara. Hey, no, I'm in the middle of a really high-profile murder investigation. I've got a murder investigation. I'm right in the middle of it. I have 4 detectives here sitting at my house. I have no problem giving you proof or anything like that. I thought I was coming into work today.
How long have you been in a relationship with Chris?
Since late November, early December.
Where all you guys been together?
Phoenix and Hawaii, Maui.
When did he tell his wife when he was home?
He would have just told that he was working.
So Sheri was not aware of the affair that you and him were having?
No, initially suspected, but he always would take pictures when he was going to sleep to prove that, he wasn't sleeping with her or anything.
See, to us, he tried to paint that it was a rosy perfect marriage.
No, they never kissed, never.
But you had even registered on some wedding sites and stuff, looked at some rings.
I looked at stuff, but with his job, he can't be living with anybody unless he's married.
Had you guys ever talked about having children together?
That revelation shifted everything. Investigators no longer had to rely on suspicion or inconsistencies. Now they had confirmation, a motive, a secret relationship. Chris had lied. Tara had told the truth. And now, the timeline of his alibi was crumbling. Combine that with the forensic evidence suggesting the family had been murdered much earlier than Chris claimed, the detectives decided it was time to apply more pressure. Earlier, something caught the attention of the chaplain inside the ambulance. Scratch marks on the inside of Chris's right forearm. Not just that, but there was also a noticeable red spot, already beginning to swell into what looked like a bruise. The captain standing just outside the ambulance overheard the chaplain ask Chris, "What happened to your arm?" But Chris didn't respond. And the strange behavior didn't stop there. In the interrogation room, Chris suddenly said he was cold. Detectives handed him a towel, and he placed it across his lap, perfectly covering his right forearm. Not his shoulders, not his chest, just that one arm he seemed very keen to hide. That's when the autopsy report gave more weight to what detectives had already suspected. Sheri's autopsy showed clear signs she had fought back before she was killed. She had 2 black eyes, the kind you get from being punched in the face. It was obvious someone had hit her. And it didn't stop there. Bruises and defensive wounds on her arms suggested she tried to protect herself during the attack. Now, those scratch marks on Chris's arm didn't just look suspicious. They looked like evidence. Evidence that Sheri had fought for her life. Evidence that her killer didn't walk away from that struggle without a mark. But despite the damning evidence, there were too many pieces still being tested. Too many questions left unanswered. So after 6 hours of intense interrogation, Chris Coleman walked out of the Columbia Police Department a free man. On May 15th, 2009, Joyce Meyer had found out about Chris's affair. That led to an internal investigation. And just like that, Chris Coleman resigned from Joyce Meyer Ministries. The evidence continued to mount as the investigators began to investigate the blood-red spray paint on the walls. They had to dig into Chris's credit card history and find something interesting. A purchase made at a place called Handyman True Value. So they contacted the store, pulled the receipt. One item stood out, a single can of Rust-Oleum apple red spray paint. The exact same kind used to write those menacing messages. And the date of that transaction is February 9th, nearly 3 months before the murders. Chris had voluntarily provided samples of his handwriting to detectives earlier in the investigation. And when they compared those samples to the threatening words on the wall, it matched. We're talking forensic level, expert confirmed, undeniable matches. Chris might have thought he could cover his tracks with a can of spray paint, but his handwriting betrayed him. But when your credit card, your paint, and your own handwriting are screaming your name, there's nowhere left to hide. And this was just one of several puzzle pieces that made it clear to investigators. Chris Coleman wasn't a grieving husband and father. He was the killer. Now the walls were closing in. On May 19th, 2009, detectives were ready. They showed up at Chris's parents' house, and this time he wasn't walking away. Chris Coleman was arrested and charged with the first-degree murders of Sheri, Gavin, and Garrett. His parents in complete shock. They refused to believe their son, the smiling, charismatic bodyguard of a preacher, was capable of murder.
That's not Chris.
Honestly, I cannot imagine him doing that.
That's not Chris.
With anybody. He just didn't really operate in that arena of emotions. He just didn't. He was just very common, logical sense. Always been a real gentle person. Kind of quiet.
Is there any way that there's a part of Chris that you don't know that could have been capable of this?
Not in my view. You couldn't put something around your kid's throat unless you're a monster.
Yeah,
and
you'd
it's
have
not
to.
there. It's just not there.
But the evidence said otherwise. Chris's parents, Ron and Connie Coleman, were in total denial about their son's guilt, even going so far as to excuse his infidelity.
Tara was just meeting a need that Sheri at the time wasn't taken care of.
But I don't understand.
Well, I mean, every man's got his desires and every man has to be respected. It's built into every man. If your wife doesn't respect you, then you're going to find respect someplace else.
So are you saying that Sheri was a bad wife?
Just at that short, brief time, she had stepped back from doing her job as a wife.
Investigators dug deeper into Chris Coleman's digital life. They stumbled across something that left them stunned. Amid all the grief, media attention, and so-called mourning, Chris was busy texting Tara, even during the interrogation. Detectives recovered dozens of messages from his phone, exchanged with Tara Lintz during those very moments he was supposed to be grieving. Tara herself later confirmed that Chris had been in touch with her during those critical moments. When asked how often they communicated, Tara responded, all the time.
Did he send you some type of message shortly after all this happened, after he came home and discovered all this?
He texted me.
What was the message from there?
From then. Call you when I can. I'm all right.
Tara then reveals Chris texted her only moments ago. Apparently, he was right in the middle of his interrogation.
I got a text. I know. You know that. He texted me. I just thought I'd tell you.
What do you want now?
Just said he was thinking about me, that the wake was at 3.
Was tell you anything about these, or that he was planning anything like this?
Absolutely
Did you
not.
have any knowledge of these homicides?
No knowledge. So,
like it or not, unfortunately, your name is Tara, motive.
Exactly.
She also revealed that Chris had told her he planned to present Sheri with divorce papers on May 4th, but later claimed there was a typo, so he pushed it to May 5th, the day his wife and sons were murdered. Chris later dismissed this as a lie he told Tara, claiming he had actually been planning to break things off with her. This, like much of what Chris said, was inconsistent with the evidence. The strongest evidence against Chris Coleman came from the emails he said were threatening his family. Police found out that all the emails were sent from Chris's own computer. They came from his IP address, using his internet, and were sent through a Gmail created on his computer. When they asked him about it, Chris said someone must have hacked into his computer to make it look like he sent the emails. But that excuse didn't help him because there was something else, something small but powerful. One of the emails had the word opportunity spelled wrong. It was written as OPPURTUNITY. That might not sound like a big deal until the investigators checked Chris's other writing. They found that he always spelled opportunity that same wrong way. On April 6, 2011, Joyce gave a deposition detailing the concerns her ministry had about Chris Coleman's behavior prior to the murders. During her deposition, Joyce Meyer was asked when she first met Chris Coleman and how his role within her ministry began. She explained that Chris had been with Joyce Meyer Ministries for several years and that he originally started working as a part of the security team.
And we'll get right to the point. Do you know the defendant in this case, Christopher Coleman?
Yes, I do.
How long have you known him?
Since he was a little boy.
And how was that?
His parents came to some conferences that I did over in Illinois. I did a weekly meeting over there, and his mother came to it, brought him with him.
Now, at some point, did he become an employee of Joyce Meyer's ministry?
Yes, he did.
And about when was that?
Probably about 1998.
Okay. So through 2009, he was with you about 11 years, is that correct?
Yeah.
What kind of employee was he? What was his responsibilities there?
He was in the security department.
Was he in general security? Did he move up through the ranks? What happened with that?
If I remember correctly, he started in general security, and then he became the supervisor of that department. And then when a personal security person that I had left our employ, we offered Chris that job, and he took it.
And what did that job entail then? Did he travel with you?
He traveled with us when we did conferences, when we did speaking engagements, and when we went out of the country and did crusades in other countries.
How often, was it monthly that you would take one of these longer trips?
Well, out of the country, we would only go 2 to 3 times a year. And then we did 13 conferences here in the U.S. And there may have been some years where we did even more than that because we cut down some as time went by. And then I would do several speaking engagements a year.
Okay, so a different trip where you just go there and back?
Yes.
As opposed to a conference where you might stay for a few days?
Yeah, when we did our conferences, we'd be gone Thursday, Friday, Saturday. If I did a speaking engagement, I would normally just go and come back the same day.
And by the end of his employment, he was traveling with you to all these conferences?
Yes.
What did he do during the conferences?
Just made sure that everything was safe for me in the crowds, when people wanted to talk to me, that it was okay, that it was somebody that was okay. That we have pretty large crowds, and so it was mainly just for our safety and to make sure that everything went right.
Would he travel ahead of your party to arrange things like that, or?
Sometimes he went ahead of us, yes, and then sometimes he went with us.
Joyce Meyer was asked specifically about Chris Coleman's work laptop.
And by 2009, at the end of his employment, do you know how much he was making?
$100,000.
Did he have a company laptop computer?
Yes.
Did he carry it with him?
Yes.
Is this something that you saw with him when you made these trips, for example?
Yes.
He seemed to always have it with him?
Yeah, he carried his computer.
Okay. Did you ever see anybody else use that computer other than the defendant?
No.
Joyce was then asked if she knew Chris was having an affair at the time he worked for her ministry. She responded with a calm and steady tone, saying she had no idea. Chris had always maintained a polished image, professional, courteous, and deeply committed to both his job and his family.
Okay, at some point you did learn that the defendant was having an affair, is that correct?
Yes.
Was that from the police, or how did you actually find that out?
Well, the police initially said that he had confessed to the affair.
Once you were aware that he was having an affair, and obviously he's no longer employed with you, what happened to his employment?
He resigned.
Okay. Did he discuss that with you?
No, that was handled through our COO.
Okay. Did you fire him? Did
I
you
didn't
terminate
know.
his employment? Okay. So once that situation became common knowledge, the defendant resigned employment with Joyce Meyer Ministry?
He asked to resign, yes.
Okay. And you accepted his resignation?
Yes.
While Joyce Meyer maintained that she had no knowledge of Chris's affair, she did admit that she was aware of some marital issues between Chris and Sheri. She recalled that Chris had spoken to her vaguely on occasion about struggles at home. Following her admission that she was somewhat aware of Chris and Sheri's marital tension, Joyce was asked whether she had been made aware of the threatening emails and messages that Chris had reportedly received before the murders.
Did you ever become aware of any threats that this defendant said he had received against himself or his family?
Yes, he told me about some.
The defendant personally told you that?
Yes.
What did he tell you? What threats did he report?
He told me that he had gotten an email threatening his family if he did not stop working for me. And then he told me that somebody started putting these threats in his mailbox, at which point I think he became more concerned about them, since that meant somebody knew where he lived. He told me that they had taken the information to the police in Belleville, and that he also had a detective that lived across the street from him, and that they were going to make arrangements to put a camera there on his mailbox to see if they could see who was actually doing it.
And you said Belleville. He actually lived in Columbia, is that
Okay,
right?
well, Columbia, yeah.
That's
I'm
what I thought
sorry.
you meant. When do you think that was, when you became aware of the threats from him?
I think it was probably sometime late March or in April.
Of 2009 then?
Yeah.
This is spring, okay. To your knowledge, had any other employees ever been singled out in that way?
No.
Did you have other employees that provided security as this defendant did?
One other one, yes.
And there wasn't any threats or anything to that person?
No.
Joyce Meyer would later explain what she had noticed about Chris Coleman in the weeks before the murders. She said Chris didn't seem like his usual self. Normally, he was calm, focused, and serious about his work. But in those weeks, she saw a change.
Okay, this was all from a conversation you had with police on May the 6th, but on May the 12th, did you again ask to talk to the police?
Yes.
Why did you do that?
About a month prior to the beginning of May, say during the month of April, I just felt like I was just noticing that he wasn't as attentive to his duties. He was forgetting things that were just not normally him, and just in general not quite as engaged. I noticed a personal cell phone in his car one day that was being charged up, and I asked him about that because I'd never seen him with it, because he had a ministry phone. That was what he carried all the time. And he just said it was a personal cell phone, and I started asking other questions, and then I just thought, it's really none of my business if he has a personal cell phone, so I let that go.
Did he, during that period of time, ever call in sick for work?
On May the 4th, he called and told me that he wasn't feeling good and asked if he could take the day off.
May the 4th, 2009.
Right.
Was that unusual for the defendant?
Yes. He worked for us 11 years, so I can't swear that he never took a day off, but I didn't remember him ever calling me and saying that he didn't feel good and wanted to take off. He was just always there.
And how were you informed on May the 4th, 2009 that he wasn't coming to work that day?
He called me in the morning and asked me if he could take the day off.
Okay.
The deposition then turned to a critical detail: the ministry's trip to Florida and Chris Coleman's unexpected decision to stay behind.
Did the defendant go on a trip with you during that period of time to the state of Florida?
Yes.
Was there anything about that trip, again, something you observed directly of the defendant, that caused you now to be suspicious?
Well, he stayed there. He said he wanted to stay down there for a few days after our trip was over, after the working part of our trip was over. He said he was going to visit these friends, a girlfriend of Sheri's, after I found out that that was the girl that he'd been having the affair with. Made me kind of suspicious then as to why he stayed there.
And that was sometime during this period of time, late 2008, early 2009?
Yes, I think it was in 2009.
Okay. And was that unusual for him to stay after when you'd gone on a trip?
Yeah, and especially he was by himself, so.
Okay. And again, in retrospect, that made you wonder?
Yeah.
Okay.
Joyce Meyer's deposition lasted just under 30 minutes, but in that short time, it revealed a lot. Just days after the conversation with Joyce, Detective Barlow and Officer Donjon testified about the condition of the victims' bodies when they were discovered. Their descriptions, cold, gray, and stiff, confirmed that the deaths had occurred hours before Chris claimed to have left the house. Dr. Michael Baden also testified, reinforcing that the time of death was much earlier than 5 a.m., likely closer to 3 a.m. His findings highlighted the intimate and prolonged nature of the murders. Despite this expert testimony, Chris attempted to discredit the findings. He claimed that a different formula could be used to calculate the time of death, one that would conveniently place it at 5 a.m., just minutes after he left for the gym. Let's go over what would have to be true for Chris Coleman to be innocent. 1. The killer would have to hate Joyce Meyer so much that they chose to murder only Chris's family, not the family of her other bodyguard. 2. This killer would need to have DNA that looks just like Chris's. 3. They would have to know where Chris lived, know his work schedule, and use his computer to send those scary emails. 4. They would also have to misspell the word opportunity the same weird way Chris did. 5. Their handwriting would have to match Chris's exactly. 6. They would have to come in through a basement window that just happened to be left unlocked. 7. Then they would need to kill Chris's whole family, write threats on the walls, turn off the security camera, and leave without anyone seeing them. That's a lot of coincidences. At this point, the only way Chris could be innocent is if someone out there looked and acted exactly like him and planned all of this perfectly. That's not just unlikely, it's impossible. This wasn't a case of circumstantial evidence piling up by coincidence. It was a calculated crime, carried out by a man desperate to start a new life, no matter the cost. On May 5th, 2011, exactly 2 years after the murders of Sheri, Garrett, and Gavin, Chris Coleman was found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. The following day, the jury decided Chris was eligible for the death penalty. However, with the death penalty recently abolished in Illinois, Chris waived his right to jury sentencing, leaving the final decision to the judge. Less than 2 months later, the judge handed down Chris's sentence, 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. And so, Chris Coleman remains behind bars, serving 3 life sentences without parole, a fitting end for a man who chose ambition, lies, and selfish desires over the lives of his own family. If this case has stunned you, then the horrific story of a father who wiped out his entire family during Christmas week will leave you speechless. You can tap on the screen to watch, and make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching. See you on the next one.